Welcome to the CouchScouts podcast. We provide league-winning analysis, advice, and tools to help you dominate your league and build a dynasty. Scout, draft, win. Here's your host, Matt Cooper.
Welcome to the CouchScouts podcast. I am your host, Matt Cooper. With me tonight is my co-host, Matt Rupert.
How you doing, my man?
I am doing great. I wish I could say the same about Matt Jackson. He is at home, pretty sick, and it's going around. I feel like half the people I know are sick right now, but it sounds like Jackson's got it pretty bad. So, wish the best for him. Get well soon, brother. We're going to hold down the fort tonight. So, on this episode of tonight's podcast, we will be continuing our Inside the Prospect series. If you have been following along, we are working our way through the 2025 rookie class and evaluating these guys from a dynasty perspective. So we are going through, we're not going position by position. We're just kind of picking a couple of prospects each week, and we're just going trait by trait. We watch at least 5 games of all 22 film, every snap that they are on the field. And we break them down from a film perspective, it's a lot of fun. Hopefully it's informative for you guys, the listeners, as you're getting a feel for who these prospects are. And tonight we're going to be discussing TreyVeon Henderson, running back out of Ohio State. He's listed at 5'10" and 208 pounds. He's a senior, was the number 1 running back in his recruiting class and a 5-star prospect. And he delivered on that early with 1,200 yards rushing and 15 rushing touchdowns as a true freshman for Ohio State. Had a little bit of a disappointing second season as a sophomore. A lot of that was due to injury. He only had 571 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns. Little bit of a bounce back last year as a junior. Another 926 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns, and then finally comes back this year, his senior year, and he put up 1,016 rushing yards, but on only 144 carries, so 7.1 yards per carry. It was his most efficient season, and a lot of that was he was splitting time with Quinshon Judkins. So 1,000 yards while splitting the backfield with another high-level NFL prospect is nothing to sneeze at for sure, and he contributed in the receiving department as well. He had 27 receptions this season for 284 yards and 1 touchdown. So, pretty good collegiate career for TreyVeon Henderson. Nothing too crazy, but being that number 1 running back in his class and the 5-star, he's kind of continued to hold value in people's eyes, even from a Devy perspective. He's been on radars for a long time. So we're going to find out. Sometimes you get a guy like Zach Evans. You may or may not remember Zach Evans from a few years ago. He was a Devy darling, 5-star. I think he was the number 2 running back in his class behind Bijan Robinson coming out of high school. Had pretty decent college production, and then was a 6th-round pick and has done nothing in the NFL. So with these guys that are Devy darlings, it's our responsibility as tape grinders to get in here and find out, is the hype warranted? And so we're going to find out tonight here with TreyVeon Henderson. As always, with the running back position, we start with vision and patience. I think everything else kind of flows from that, how you see the field and make the reads. It's probably the most baseline important skill that a running back can have, and without it, it's hard to be successful no matter how good you are at everything else. So, Rupert, what did you notice here from TreyVeon Henderson in terms of his vision and patience?
I really like him in this area, but I will say with a caveat, I feel like his vision wasn't as good in between the tackles, kind of when it gets muddy. I think that he had really good vision to be able to be creative, see backside lanes, really get the defense flowing one way and then feel the cut all the way back to the outside. I thought he was really good in that area, and he just struggled a little bit. And I shouldn't even say struggled. I feel like there was a couple times where he could have chose a better alley to kind of go up in the middle, maybe been a little bit more patient. But overall, I thought he was really good in this area. Um, I just loved his ability to feel like the backside open up and be able to cut it all the way back. I thought that's where he showed really good skill, and I thought he was really creative too at the next level to kind of set guys up to be able to break off the long runs. And he did that pretty consistently, it seems like, throughout his career.
Okay. Yeah. I will say that I saw similarly where he did better outside the numbers than inside the tackles. Um, this wasn't my favorite part of his game. I didn't hate it. I wasn't like coming away from it saying, oh, this is a major red flag. This is going to keep him from being successful in the NFL. But there were a number of instances I noticed where he should have cut it up inside and instead tried to bounce it outside when that was the clear wrong decision. And so, that's not great, but it's not the worst thing in the world. I didn't feel like he was like just ramming into his offensive line every time and hoping to find daylight. Like he wasn't just blind out there. He was following his blocks as they were designed pretty well for the most part. And I don't know if I would have described him as creative or like manipulating the defense, trying to get them to choose the wrong lane. And, I don't think he was creating for himself with his vision, but he was for the most part getting what was blocked for him. I gave him a 7 for vision and a 7.5 for patience. So a little better than average in those categories. What did you give him there?
I gave him 8 for vision and 7.5 for patience.
Okay, so you were a little higher on that area of his
Yeah,
game
I
than
feel
I
like
was.
yeah, and mainly because of he's had such a good feel for those backside cuts
Hmm.
to where I feel like he knows the blocking scheme, and he would kind of hover behind his offensive line while they're all kind of shifting to the right, and then he knows that cutback's going to cut open. He stops, cuts it all the way back across the field to the left, and it's 30-yard gain. Um, so that's why, despite a couple instances where I didn't love what I saw, I just saw so many of those instances to where I felt comfortable grading him a little bit higher here.
Yeah, for sure. I think he's a good one cut runner. He's
Yeah.
probably primarily a zone guy where, string it out to the outside, wait for that cutback lane to open up, make one good cut and hit it.
Yep.
That's probably where he's at his best. So let's get into our next category here, which is elusiveness. What did you notice from TreyVeon Henderson, good or bad, in this department?
I It's probably my favorite part of his game, or I
Really?
should say second favorite. Um, yeah, like he has a really good jump cut. I will say he hurdles too much, in my opinion. I don't know how many times I saw him hurdle. I'm like, just juke the guy, because he has a good, strong single leg cut, to where he can just plant one foot and go back the other direction. Um, and it seemed like he relied on the hurdle quite a bit. But I think with his size and his quickness, his athleticism, he's able to make guys miss. Um, I wouldn't call him like a Bucky Irving type of guy,
Not at
but
all.
yeah. But somewhere in that Bucky Irving kind of light where um, he can make a guy miss one on one.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think he's anywhere in the same stratosphere as Bucky Irving. And, you're a little higher on Henderson than I am, even in terms of overall grade. This was another area where I was a little lower than you. You had him at an 8, I think. I had him at a 7. And what I saw was that there were times where he could make a guy miss. He showed the ability to do that. Um, and particularly there were times that an unblocked man would get in the backfield and he could make them miss in a really tight space, which I like to see. There were a lot of like spins or cuts, like as soon as he took the handoff, where he had to dodge a penetrating defender and make something out of nothing, and he was able to do that. What he was not able to do, or that I didn't see, was to string together multiple moves, multiple cuts. Kind of where you watch a guy, Bucky Irving does a great job with this. Genty, a lot of the high level guys, Bijan did this when he was in college, and obviously in the NFL too, where it looks like they're playing a video game where it's like juke and then spin and then juke back the other direction. And they're just stringing together multiple moves, thinking 3 steps ahead, making multiple guys miss. I didn't see that really at all with TreyVeon Henderson. I thought, he can make one pretty good move and then he needs to get north south. And I didn't see the explosiveness out of the cuts as much as I would have liked to. Like he could make the guy miss, but then getting back up to speed afterwards. Um, it was just all right. So for me, I gave him a 7, and it's going to sound like I'm dumping on Henderson. I liked him. He's got a good overall grade. We'll talk about. I'll kind of summarize at the end. He would have been, based on film grade, he would have been my RB2 in last year's class, and within a point of Jonathan Brooks, who was my RB1. So he's graded higher than I had Bucky Irving last year. And part of that is because Bucky Irving had like a 2 for pass protection, and just his size, he had some limiting factors where I think I liked Bucky better than my tape grade indicated. But anyway, Henderson, he's right up there. So like, I'm not trying to dump all over Henderson. I'll explain at the end why I'm giving all these slightly above average scores and why that's not necessarily a bad thing. But we'll go into the next area, which so we start with elusiveness, we move on to power and contact balance. So those are primarily like the two ways that if you're looking for a running back to get yards that weren't blocked for him, a lot of times it's either with elusiveness, making a guy miss, or the power and kind of running through somebody. What did you see here in terms of the power and the balance from TreyVeon
I
Henderson?
thought he was okay here. Nothing special. I think I gave him what's like a 7, pretty much across the board here with pad level, contact balance, and physicality. Like he always falls forward. He doesn't really get knocked back from what I saw. I thought he played with pretty good pad level, and I will say, like, I feel like my score here is based on size. Like he's not a big running back, being under 210.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought for his size, I thought he had pretty good power to be able to, I saw him a lot of times, like he'll take a hit and then spin out of it and get 3, 4, 5 yards after that. So seeing that over and over again, I felt like I gave him a slightly above average here with a 7.
All right, take a quick break here to shout out Dynasty Dogs. He's watching. Says, "Dang it, guys! I wanted to take a nap. Guess now I got to stay up." Um, you're at Senior Bowl. You deserve a nap. You're doing good work out there. I wish I was at Senior Bowl too. That would be a lot of fun. But yeah, dude, you can stay up, hang out with us, then take a nap afterwards. You shouldn't be surprised. We're on the same time every week. So, all right. Moving on, we're talking about power and contact balance. TreyVeon Henderson, I had him again just above average, like 7, 7.5. I had him at 7 for break tackle, 7.5 for balance, 7.5 for physicality and power. I had him at a 7. I had him at 8 for pad level, so I really liked his pad level a good bit. But overall, TreyVeon Henderson, for his size, and he's listed at 208. I wouldn't be surprised if he weighs in a little heavier than that. He looks like kind of short and stout. Seems like most of his weight is in his legs. He's got big, thick legs, strong lower base, and yeah, he was able to get low and break some tackles, and it wasn't crazy elite like we've talked about Hampton and Scadaboo and Genty and some of these guys that's like, man, people cannot tackle them. They're twisting and turning out of every tackle and just have next level instincts. I don't see that with Henderson. It's not bad. It's not blowing me away either. It, it was somewhat inconsistent. Sometimes he would break a tackle, and a lot of times he wouldn't. So yeah, decent power, but not blowing me away. And so even a lot of times a guy has a clear archetype of like he's either an elusive back or he's a power back. I don't see a clear archetype with Henderson. Like he can do both things, but not at an elite level. And so a quote that I've heard describing Henderson is jack of all trades, master of none. And I think that fits him so well. There's one thing that he is a master of, and we're going to talk about it later. But for the most part, he's just a really well-rounded running back. Like he doesn't do anything poorly. He plays the game the right way. He's a smart runner with decent physicality and decent elusiveness, and the athleticism we're going to talk about in a second. It's well above average, I would say, but again, not like blowing you away. Curious to hear your take on that in a minute, but yeah, I feel like he's solid. He's reliable. He plays the game the right way. But as a runner between the tackles, there's not that many parts of his game that jump off to me like, wow. Would you agree with
I
that?
agree that I don't think he really has any holes in his game. Coach is going to love the guy. Um, I, I
Mhm.
I guess we can go ahead and transition into it. I thought his burst and
Yeah.
acceleration was really, really good. And I'll give a little throwback comp here. To me, he reminded me a bit of D'Angelo Williams light. I feel like D'Angelo had
Okay.
pretty darn elite acceleration and burst to really just eliminate angles going up the field. And I feel like I saw a lot of the same things with Henderson. Um, and I guess that kind of like goes into my elusiveness grade a little bit because he would make one guy miss and then accelerate, and the other guys wouldn't catch him. He'd be able to like round out his angle, get to the sideline. The safety's not able to get the angle on him, and he's going in for a touchdown. I just really liked his burst. I think that was my favorite part of his game, other than the last thing we'll talk about.
Yeah. I'm not trying to say I didn't like it. I had him in at 8 for both of those things. It just doesn't, it's not like blow you away. Similar score. I had Hampton at an 8 in both of those, but I think for his size, like I'm more
Yeah,
impressed with Hampton's
yeah.
explosiveness. Um, Genty, I had an 8 and an 8.5. So like similar speed, but I thought Genty had a little bit more burst than him and a higher quickness grade. So I had him at a 7 for quickness, 8 for speed, 8 for burst. Very respectable scores. Um, I guess as far as a runner between the tackles, I didn't have anything higher than an 8. I didn't have any like 9s or 10s or anything that was like this is his elite trait.
Uh,
Like when we looked at Hampton, I had him at a 10 for physicality and power. When we looked at Genty, I had him at a 10 for contact balance. Usually, often there's at least one category where I give a guy a 9 or higher, and those categories are there for TreyVeon Henderson. We haven't talked about him yet, but they're not as a runner between the tackles. So, yeah, I liked his athleticism too. I think we graded him
mhm.
similar there. Definitely not a bad athlete by any stretch. Um, let's move on. So the last thing that we always talk about is third down skill set, and for me, this is where he shines. Even though the statistics, the box score doesn't really shine in this area. Like his career high for receptions in a season was 27. His freshman season, he had 312 receiving yards and 4 touchdowns, and that was his high watermark. So the numbers don't pop out. I personally think that was more about how Ohio State was using him than what he can and can't do. And there were some flashes for me of really high level stuff on third down. Curious how you saw that department.
I feel like we're in lockstep here. I ended up grading him 8.5 for receiving. He's looked, and I've talked about this before, so potential new listeners, like when I'm looking at a running back as a wide receiver, or not as a wide receiver, as a receiving back, what I'm looking for the most part, is how natural do they look? Are they fighting or struggling to really catch the ball? Or are they just throw out their hands, pluck it, and turn into like looking for yak right away? And that's what I saw with him. He looked natural catching the pass, and then he just turns right away going into yak and getting those yards after catch.
Yeah, so for me, he's even a little bit more than that. So I kind of think about it in terms of three levels to this thing. Like one is you can't catch. You're a liability in that department. Pass fail, you're a fail. Second level is what you're talking about. Like I can catch the ball reliably and transition to yards after catch, but I'm not really out there running routes. It's mostly just screens, check downs, like typical running back stuff. The third level that not that many guys get to is like I'm a pass catching weapon. You can put me out in the slot. I can run routes. If I'm on a linebacker, that linebacker is cooked. If I go out and run a route against him, and obviously that can be gold for fantasy. It also is like for an offensive coordinator in the NFL, they're going to love that because you're their queen in chess. You can move them all over the board, and the defense has to react to it, and it's really hard to cover. And there's not that many guys, even in the NFL. I mean, you got your Christian McCaffrey. I think James Cook, to an extent, can do some of that stuff. Jameer Gibbs, Devin Achan, and all those guys are really good for fantasy that I just named. Um, Eckler was that way for a lot of years. And I feel like I saw that, even though he only had a career high of 27 receptions in a season. Did you see the clip? This was at the end of the Purdue game, I think, where they lined him up out wide, and he ran a sluggo route, like a double move, slant and go, and he torched the guy, was wide open, and then tracked the ball over his shoulder for a touchdown catch. I mean, it was beautiful. It was like, oh my gosh, if he can do that. There were multiple times that they put him out either outside or in the slot, and he ran routes and he looked
Mhm.
good doing it, and that spoke volumes to me. The hands looked really good, the tracking. There were times on wheel routes where he's 20, 30 yards down the field and tracking, turning around backwards, adjusting to a ball that's not put right on him. Beyond just your I can catch a check down and take it for 10 yards, it was like this guy can be a weapon in the
Yeah.
receiving game. And then you add to that the last grade that we have been teasing and hinting this whole time. This is pass protection, man. I gave him a 10 out of 10.
Me as well.
He is an absolute beast in pass protection. I mean, you're talking about a guy that when linebackers are blitzing up the middle, he just will stand them up, stonewall them. I saw him knock a defensive end, on his backside, pancaked him.
Yeah.
You don't see that out of running backs very often, like that strong lower base, the technique, the willingness, the awareness. He was a really high level pass blocker, and then there was even one that, they were running the quarterback, and so they used TreyVeon as the lead
Yep.
blocker coming around the edge, and he laid this dude out and then, like, stood over him, like, you know, making the strongman pose. It was like, I mean, he opened that up for a touchdown for Will Howard with his blocking. So I loved that aspect of his game. And so this is where for me, this takes it from okay, he's slightly above average in every department as a runner for me, not blown me away. But when you add this third down element, he never has to come off the field. He can be a 3 down workhorse if the team chooses to use him that way. And and then add like a solid, respectable runner on top of it with some decent elusiveness and decent power and good vision. I think this guy has really good fantasy upside if he lands in the right situation. I think he's going to get really good draft capital. I think a coach is going to fall absolutely in love with him and want to give him all the work he can handle. And you threw out a couple of comps. My comp for him is Matt Forte. Matt Forte was a great pass catching running back that never came off the field. And I don't think he ever really blew you away with, being overly athletic or the most elusive or the, truck sticking guys. He just did everything right and caught a lot of passes. And he was a beast for fantasy
Yeah.
for years. So Matt Forte is my comp for
I like
TreyVeon
that.
Henderson.
Yeah. Yeah. I also graded him at a 10 as pass pro. Saw the same thing. Just you can make your own highlight reel of his pass protection. It was ridiculous. Yeah. So to conclude, like my thoughts on Henderson, like he doesn't have any holes in his game. I feel like he's great in the acceleration, burst, those kinds of areas, and then not great, elite in receiving pass pro. So to me, and it also seems like he's just a really great teammate. Hung around at Ohio State when, not today's society, when Jukins transferred there, he could have easily just gone somewhere else. Be like, no, I'm gonna be a weed back somewhere else. Stay till senior year. So I feel like this guy is just going to be, coach is going to fall in love with him, and they're going to get him the ball. He's not going to have to come off the field either. So I really like his upside for fantasy, and I feel like he could easily end up being my RB2 depending on the landing spot, even though his film grade's slight. I think he's at my RB3 right now, behind Hampton. Yeah, he just does so many things well, and then does a couple of things great and / elite. He's just so well rounded. Really like him.
Yeah, one other thing I want to shout out about TreyVeon Henderson. If you've been listening for a while, you know that the three of us who host this podcast are pretty open Christians. It's a huge part of our life. I work in professional Christian ministry. TreyVeon Henderson is a really strong Christian. And when he came back to school this year, kind of unfinished business stuff, but there was kind of a little bit of a spiritual revival on that team, and TreyVeon Henderson was at the head of it. So he was kind of a spiritual leader in that locker room, which, to me, I like that. That's not factoring into like my running back ranks or anything like that, but I just wanted to shout that out real quick. I love that about his character. But yeah, I mean, you've got him at a 78, which would have been your RB1 last year. I've got him right in that range as well. And so he's probably going to be a top 5 guy for us in this class, and definitely a strong, excuse me, a strong running back prospect that we're excited about. I expect good draft capital. As we wrap up the show today, I realize that once again, I forgot to shout out any of our stuff. So congratulations. You guys got a whole podcast without an ad read. So I'm going to be quick here. CouchScouts.com. If you haven't checked it out, please check it out. We are working hard to release our 2025 rookie guide, which, we'll take our thoughts on all these guys that we've put in podcast form and get them written down. We'll cover a bunch of guys that we don't get to on the podcast. We're going to have film grades for every player. We're going to have rankings. We're going to trait by trait breakdowns. So it's going to be kind of the ultimate cheat sheet for you in your rookie draft, to have all of it just on a sheet of paper in front of you, to know, whether you want to use it to make your own informed decisions based on our takes, or whether you just want to follow our rankings. They're well researched and we stand by them. However you want to use that thing, but I think it's a great tool. We had a number of people buy it last year and got really positive feedback on that. You also can get the All 22 Film Room bonus podcast. So we're about to get off of this podcast. We're going to go talk about Dylan Sampson on our bonus show just for members. So if you subscribe to the site, you can hear that show. And definitely would love for you guys to consider joining the Couch Scouts. Also, please, if you're a new listener, and I know there's a lot of new listeners because our numbers are up in the analytics, which is awesome, and we appreciate it. Leave us a review. I think there's like 3 people that have left a 5-star review on Spotify. That would just make it. It takes you 2 seconds. It would make such a huge difference in terms of Spotify algorithm recommending us to people and people finding the show. So, would really appreciate it if y'all would take a second to do that. And asking you to do things for us. So if you'd like to engage with us, you can find us in our free Discord, which will be linked in the show notes. or you can follow us on social media. I'm at CouchScoutsFF, and he is at Matthew Rupert